Today on Histories Prototypes, we are looking at the United States attempt to build heavy tanks to counter the threat of the Tiger tanks. So we're going to be looking at the T29 and the T30. Now, both of these tanks were developed in parallel, trying to create a heavy tank as quickly as possible. And while neither one of these tanks would work out and be a production vehicle, the lessons learned for them would allow the United States to continue developing better tanks. But let's go ahead and look at the T29 and T30. Now, when the Tiger tank and later Tiger II tanks came onto the scene, the United States realized that it was behind in terms of being able to counter such a heavy tank. So they began rapid development of a new type of heavy tank. Now, the initial tank that the United States did come up with was the M6 heavy tank. However, testing showed that it basically wasn't any better than a Sherman tank, and its gun was actually underpowered. And while they did use it as a test platform, it was eventually abandoned, and there was a need for a new heavy tank. Now, because time was a factor, they went ahead and used an existing hull design, the M26 Pershing, for the initial development of both the T29 and T30. Now, essentially what they did was take an M26 Pershing's hull and lengthen it to support a new, larger gun, and then added a much larger engine to handle the additional weight. With the hull done, they paired it with a 105mm high-velocity T5E1 cannon. Additional armament included two coaxial-mounted 50 caliber machine guns, a 30 caliber on the right side of the hull, with the setup for an additional 50 caliber as an anti-aircraft gun if they needed it. In terms of performance, it could travel about 100 miles. It could actually cross trenches more than 94 inches wide, wade in up to 4 feet of water, and could actually traverse 3-foot tall steps without any issue. So overall, the tank had a pretty good performance capability. However, the question about the gun and its capability is what caused the development of the T30. Now, when the T29 was announced, it was pretty much unsure if its gun could penetrate the 150mm thick armor on a Tiger II. And because the doubts were severe enough, they went ahead and developed a variant of this plan. They called it the T30, and what it was going to be equipped with was a 155mm M1A1 gun known as the Long Tom. Now, the Long Tom was actually an American copy of the French 155mm field gun. And initially, this was the only two differences between the two tanks, two different guns. However, later on, as they were developing the T30, they went ahead and tried different engine configurations, making it quite different. Now, because it mounted a much larger gun, it did not have the range, the capacity to carry as much ammo, and didn't even mount as many guns on it as the T29 did. Now, both of these tanks were on track for development, and actually by the time 1945 rolled around, it was decided to bump up the number of tanks being ordered. But by the time the initial prototypes were being rolled out for more development, the war ended, and they really didn't know what to do with these tanks. So the existing prototypes, 7 for the T29, 6 for the T30, were basically put out to be utilized for tank development. They were sent off to Aberdeen Proving Ground. They were tested for different capabilities, the ability to take out other tanks. They were used in different trials, kind of determining what was going to be the future. So both of these tanks basically had their careers ended before they could even start. But the developments from these tanks would not go in vain. They would actually give birth to the T-34 Heavy tank, which sadly only had 2 prototypes, but the development of that tank would lead to this, the M103 Heavy tank. And the M103 would actually go on to serve with the United States military for more than 20 years, finally being retired by the United States Marine Corps in 1974. Now today, if you would like to see the T29 and T30, they still exist. The 2 surviving T29s are both located at the U.S. Army Armor and Cavalry Collection at Fort Benning, Georgia. And as for the T30, there are 4 known prototypes to exist. One is at the Aberdeen Proving Grounds, one is at the Detroit Tank Arsenal, one is at Fort Jackson, and the 4th one is located at the U.S. Army Armor and Cavalry Collection at Fort Benning, Georgia. But there you have it, a look at the failed prototypes of the T29 and T30 heavy tanks. What was supposed to be the next generation, or at least a new generation of heavy tanks for the United States to compete with German armor, that ends up failing, not necessarily because of its inability or lacking of anything, it failed to time. The war ended before it was needed. So, while it didn't do well itself, it would eventually give birth to the M103 Heavy tank. But that's it for today. Thank you for joining me, and I look forward to talking to you on the next time.